Welcome back for the second half of the presidential chapter or chapter 7 on the presidency, or as the French would say, bonsoir, mon amis. Good day, my friends. If you happen to be watching at night, we'll go Spanish. Buenas noches, mi amigos. Alrighty. I believe we left off last time with constitutional powers of the president. There are 8 of those. These are explicitly written into the constitutions. There's no quibbling about whether the president can do it or not. First off, the president is considered the commander-in-chief, basically head of the armed forces. The other one, which is a little bit ambiguous, administrative head of the nation. What does administration mean? Well, we've kind of meant it means head of the bureaucracy today. So if there is a problem with any of the agencies, pretty much in the cabinet or stuff like that, then technically the president is the top man to go to. But of course, the president has so much other stuff to do. They usually can't get anything done for you. So congressman is probably your better bet as far as that goes. They can also call special sessions of Congress. They don't do this much anymore because Congress, it used to be sort of part-time. They would set their own schedule. Generally, they would come in the spring and the fall for about 3 to 4 months, take a couple months off, 3 to 4 months. So if it got too hot or too cold, they were gone. That the president could call them back into special session if there was an emergency. Now, of course, he can do that today if they happen to be on one of their long breaks. February, August is usually their longest one, or around Christmas, something like that. But I haven't really had an emergency to do with that, so not a big thing. Common power of the president is the veto. They can veto any law coming out of Congress. Of course, Congress can override with 2/3 vote in both houses. They nominate their top officials and judges. There is a confirmation that has to be done by the Senate, but they nominate their people. Generally, they get whoever they want for the most part, unless they happen to be too extreme in their ideology one way or the other. Or Congress is being especially difficult for some reason. That's happening right now with Obama's next pick for Attorney General. Eric Holder has said that he wants to resign, but he said he would stay in power until Congress nominates a new person. For some reason, they're dragging their feet on that one. Obama has nominated a lady for that. I think she was some judge or Attorney General out of New York, and there's really no reason not to go ahead and approve her, but Congress has been dragging their feet, or the Senate has been dragging their feet on that one, because there are a lot of people who would like to see Eric Holder go, especially on the Republican side. So a lot of Democrats are scratching their heads going, what's the holdup? But whatever. They also make treaties. This is their job. They make treaties, then they present them to the Senate for advice and consent, and if the Senate says it's okay, then the president signs off and ratifies the treaty on themselves. This is kind of what got in with that little letter to Iran recently, where they kind of told Iran, well, if we don't like it, we're not going to approve it, and then the president can't ratify it and all that. It's kind of weird, but that the Senate would do something like that. They've done they've done it in the past, but it's very rare that they do something, that they step in. I mean, they don't even know what's in the treaty yet. So how can they disprove something that they don't even know what they're talking about, frankly? So it's kind of interesting that they would go to that extreme before they even see what's in it. The one controversial power of the president is they grant pardons. Pardons and paroles. Many presidents have had controversial pardons. They all seem to have at least one, especially the most controversial are usually towards the end of their presidency. Bill Clinton did a guy, Bill Rich, who was living in Europe because of tax evasion. So his wife gave a lot of money to the campaign, gave a lot of money to his library, and right before he left office, Clinton gave him a full pardon. Yeah. Probably the most controversial of all the pardons, the one most people hated, was the one President Ford gave to Richard Nixon for any and all, anything dealing with Watergate. A lot of people were very upset with that one. They wanted to see Nixon go to trial and get in trouble for that. But as we all know today, it was just he had nothing to do with the Watergate. It was just when he was told about it, he tried to cover it up. He was out of office. There was really nothing to do with that. So even though a lot of people were mad about it, it's actually turned out that was probably the best thing to do at the time, but it's still considered a controversial pardon. And then there are others. Bush, for example, the first Bush, George H.W. Bush, gave 100 or so pardons to a lot of people in the Reagan administration for the Iran-Contra scandal. Without congressional approval, they sold weapons to Iran. Technically, they had promised this before Reagan was even president, said, you release the hostages and we'll sell you weapons. And they used the money from the sale of those weapons to buy more weapons for the Contras in Nicaragua. And they did all this without congressional approval, which was a big no-no. Ollie North was kind of involved in that one, but everybody got a pardon on that. So in a way, it sort of ended up as a good thing. But if it was so good, why didn't they go through Congress? You know, so George W. Bush, last president, really had nothing controversial in the way of pardons. His biggest, most notable thing was a parole of Scooter Libby. Scooter. Yeah, I love that name, Scooter Libby. He was thought he was trying to protect his boss. He was chief of staff for Dick Cheney. And there was this outing of Valerie Plame as a CIA agent, and a lot of people thought Cheney had released that. But it turned out to be some low-level Democrat had said the name first, and Cheney thought it was out there, so he mentioned it on a news station. You aren't supposed to out CIA agents. Scooter didn't know that at the time, so he lied to FBI. That's what he got in trouble. He was tried and convicted of lying to the FBI. Instead of overturning the conviction and everything, George gave him a parole, which meant he didn't have to go to jail. The conviction stood, but he didn't have to go to jail. Being a lawyer, that meant he couldn't practice law, so he had to give up his law license. But I hear he's a really successful lobbyist right now, so I don't think that really hurt him at all. So far, Obama hasn't really done much in the way of pardons. All he's really pardoned are turkeys. A lot of people keep saying he's going to pardon this or pardon that, but he hasn't, so just have to wait and see. Most of his pardons will probably come right towards the end. That's when most of them usually wait to do. So that's 7. Finally, commission all officers in the armed forces. Any officer in the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, Merchant Marine, any of those. Whenever they become officers, they get a little certificate signed by the current president saying you are hereby inducted into the military, whatever branch, as a low-level officer of da-da-da-da-da. So there you go. These are the constitutional powers of the president. There is no way to say that they can't do this stuff. That's why when the Senate kind of stuck its finger into negotiating the treaties, it was kind of inappropriate. But oh well, we'll see how that comes out. Now, a lot of times presidents have very differing roles, as in wearing a hat. Sometimes it may be one hat or 2 hats, or sometimes they got 3 hats on top all at the same time. They can be doing multitasking with several different hats, and a lot of them usually have at least 2 hats on when they're doing it. They got 5 different hats that they can do. First one is the fun one, the chief of state. This is like being the head cheerleader for America. They go out and do the fun stuff. Rah, rah, go U.S., go U.S., go. This is reading books to kids in schools, visiting places, cutting ribbons, smashing champagne against the bow of ships, handing out medals, all sorts of good stuff like that. So it's the fun stuff that they get to do as chief of state. Greeting people, holding state dinners, things like that. So it's that's what kind of downtime for the most part. There's also chief executive. This goes back to the administrative head of the nation. They're head of the bureaucracy as chief executive. Anything that happens in the bureaucracy, which is all those cabinet level positions, plus all the others where they appoint the heads of the departments like the CDC or the FBI or the CIA, they're all under the president technically, because the head person reports to the president and all that. Chief diplomat. anytime they leave the country, there are actually two roles as chief diplomat. One, anytime they leave the country, they are the #1 ambassador for the United States. They are basically our cheerleader out and about. And when they're being the chief diplomat, this is usually when they're trying to either set the groundwork for a treaty or making a treaty or something like that. That's what they do when they leave the country. When they're here in the country, they can also put on the chief diplomat hat, because any ambassador that comes to the United States will have to get their credentials approved by the president. So they make an appointment first thing. They present their credentials to the president. They look them over real quick, sign off on them, say, okay, well, welcome to the United States, and sign the credentials, and here you go. That is what gives them and any new people with them their, the exception to our rules and laws, so they can technically break any law they want and be able to get away with it as far as that goes. We can expel them, but they have diplomatic immunity. That was it. Actually, what we find, what most of them do is they park illegally. There are hundreds and hundreds, especially in the United Nations. So in and around New York, they've got their cars double and triple parked, and they get tickets at the yin yang for parking where they aren't supposed to. But they'll never get fined. They never pay the fines and any of that stuff. So two for the chief diplomat. Chief legislator, well, 95% of the bills that go through Congress actually start in the White House. The president and his team comes up with the laws, and then they just call around and see who wants to sponsor it. It's usually pretty easy to find sponsors in either the House or the Senate for these laws. Only about 5 to 10% of the laws going through Congress actually start there. Today might be a little different with the Republican Congress, so there might be more laws coming out of the Republicans in Congress than coming out of the White House, but we'll see. And then finally, Commander-in-Chief. Commander-in-Chief is a role and a power, and it's the same thing, basically ordering the military to do whatever. Now, it doesn't give them the power to declare war, but they have to do whatever the president says. Another one are implied powers. These are powers of the president because they are the president. So, with that being said, for one of the big ones is crisis manager. There was an emergency or a crisis of some sort, like a hurricane or an earthquake or tornadoes, flash floods, wildfires. They can declare, the governors can ask the president to declare whole states or counties or cities or anything an emergency disaster zone, emergency disaster area, whatever, which then allows the feds to come in and FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Associate, or I can't remember what that last one is, agency, Federal Emergency Management Agency, to come in and help with emergency measures to either feed or house, give loans to help clean up and all that sort of stuff. And also part of crisis manager, they can go in and do the, hi, I'm the president, just here to see how things are going. They have to be careful about that. They don't want to go in too soon, because then they get in the way of emergency relief that has to be done, like digging out people and stuff like that. On the other hand, they don't want to go too late, because then it looks like they don't care. So they got to kind of time it right. A lot of times emergency people think it's kind of a pain in the neck, because they have to clean everything up before the president shows up. So there you go. They're also the party leader. President is the party leader because they're the head of their party as far as that goes when they become president. So that being the case, when Democrats took a shellacking back in 2010, and the Congress went back to Republican control, at least on the House side, that was technically on President Obama. And then when the Senate just went back to Republican control, that's also on President Obama. But he's in his last 2 years, so in a way it's kind of like, oh well, darn. He'll have a tougher time getting anything through Congress, but they do have to work together to get the general maintenance sort of stuff taken care of, so they got to work somehow, some way. We'll see how that works. And executive orders and agreements. Executive orders, basically it's an interpretation of a law or basically it has the rule of law telling the bureaucracy what they have to do. And so because it's a rule of law, they can't not do it without breaking the law. So it's kind of weird how that goes. But then there are executive agreements. Most people don't hear about those because those are usually temporary understandings with foreign countries. We're going to be having like war games maybe. I think we're in war games right now with South Korea. That's an executive agreement. Or if we allow they allow us to violate their airspace to send flights over one way or the other. That's an executive agreement. Or we allow them to send their planes up. That's an executive agreement. So there is that. From also time to time, we also see what they call the signing statements. Signing statements are addendums to a law that has been passed by Congress and is brought to the president for their signature. As they're signing off on it, many times the signing statement underneath is usually a verbiage saying, well, I can also, I reserve the right to ignore this law if I feel it's necessary. This goes back to the necessary and proper clause. This is kind of the kicker for Congress and the president. They can do whatever they consider necessary and proper to defend the United States, which means they can do just about anything they want to with that. They can come and arrest me today saying I'm a terrorist, I'm going to take down the United States. Really? Well, if they've got some proof going for that, they can come and arrest me and throw me in a deep dark hole somewhere, shoot me, maybe because I'm really a robot, I'm going to take over. Yeah, my real name's Ultron. Okay. Yeah, I can't wait for that movie. That's going to be fun. Powers of the president increase and decrease slowly over time. Sometimes they increase substantially, like when the Great Depression hit. They gave FDR anything and everything that he wanted, and he had a lot of power. And of course, especially when World War II started, he was the most powerful president ever. He was practically a dictator. He could do pretty much whatever he wanted to do because of the war and because of the Depression and everything that was going on. No president has had more power since then, except for maybe George W. Bush. He was real good at getting power to the presidency for a long time. But then, of course, when Obama came in, all the Republicans started complaining. He's got too much power. Yeah, we need to get back that. But, of course, the Republican would have gone, oh, no, he's fine. He's got enough power. Sure. That's all politics. Now, there are a lot of resources to help the president. It's a very high, stressful position. If you've ever seen presidents, especially when they go in, they're usually looking young and fit and all that. But as soon as they get into the presidency, next thing you know, the pressure's getting to them. A lot of them start getting gray hair, and they start bending over a little bit and all that sort of good stuff. This is why they have physicals all the time and doctors on call. So anything from heartburn to a hangnail, they just all flip out. Oh, my God, he's got a hangnail. Damn. So they got a lot of resources, a lot of people to help ease the pressure, give them advice and all that. One that didn't used to do too much, but now does a lot is vice president. They see the VP now as more of a partner instead of just a hanger-on. VPs used to do nothing. It was usually a place where many politicians went to die because being a VP was kind of a weird position. You're not good enough to be president, but you're too good for anything else. So nobody would give the VP the time of day because technically they could become the president. They didn't want to offend him. On the other hand, they aren't the president, so they don't have to worry about offending him. It's kind of a double-edged sword. The old saying used to go, one had two sons. One became a sailor, one became a vice president. Neither was ever heard from again. So there you go. Today, like I said, it's gone back the other way. Vice president is now a partner. This really started with Ronald Reagan. He made George H.W. Bush kind of more of a partner, started giving him things to do. And his son, George W. Bush, took that to the next level, really relied a lot on Cheney. Sometimes a lot of people call George Cheney's puppet because of that. But then Obama relies a lot on Biden because Biden's been in Congress for a long time. And that's really where a lot of them want a good vice president that has good relations with Congress. Cheney had great relations with Congress, especially the Republicans, and that's how they got a lot of presidential power into the presidency. But then Biden had the same thing. So there you go. They are on the line to replace the president. Um, heartbeat away, and that line actually goes from vice president to Speaker of the House, President pro tempore of the Senate, and then it goes back to the cabinet with the Secretary of State, Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary of Defense, Attorney General, Secretary of the Interior, etc., etc., etc. It depends on the line of succession for the cabinet members is when that cabinet was created. Now, a lot of people want Homeland Security to be right after Attorney General, but that would take an act of Congress to change the order, and they haven't seen fit to have time to do that recently. So I don't know if that'll ever change. But that's why you go from Secretary of State to Secretary of the Treasury. Everybody scratches their head on that. What does a bean counter know about being president? But, you would think Secretary of Defense would be better than Secretary, but Secretary of Treasury was created right before the Secretary of Defense. So there you go. The only real role of the Vice President, other than taking over for the President, which weird is never even mentioned in the Constitution until the 12th Amendment was passed. They just assumed everybody knew what the Vice President's job was, which was to take over when the President can't. But their one duty is to be President of the U.S. Senate. It's the only time they get to be called Mr. President without actually being President. But of course, none of them really like doing that. Looking over the Senate, it's only during debates, which they don't do that often. And it's kind of like being a judge in front of a courtroom. And if you have no real interest in what they're talking about, it's really boring. So a lot of vice presidents don't ever do that, except when their only big job there would be to break a tie. So if ever the Senate is 50-50, 50 Democrats, 50 Republicans, then vice presidents are around quite often. That happened in the Bush administration with Dick Cheney in charge, and he was never more than 10 minutes away from the Senate for about a year and a half when it was 50-50 for a while, because one Republican changed to independent and started voting with the Democrats. That was Jeff Jeffords. And so for about a year and a half, Dick Cheney was never more than 10 minutes away, so he could break some ties, and he did several times. So there's that. The cabinet, where the vice president used to be useless and now it's useful, the cabinet went the other way. They used to be kind of useful, now they're sort of useless. They're really only good now for a photo op. That's their big job, is to take pictures and look real good. They take their orders from the president now. It used to be the president would take a lot of their advice, but now they just give the president facts, and the facts makes the president makes up their own mind. May ask for their opinion on what to do, but generally they take the orders from the president, filter it down to their flunkies, whoever they are, and there you go. Most of these cabinet position people are figureheads. The only one that has a lot of real power is probably the Attorney General, who has seen a lot and does a lot and all that. Current White House staff. The White House Chief of Staff currently is Dennis McDonough, M-C-D-O-N-O-U-G-H, Dennis McDonough. I guess it's Irish, M-C-D-O-N-O-U-G-H. I think this is about either the third or the fourth of the Obama presidency. They don't last long. This is probably one of the highest pressure jobs ever. The average is about 2 years because they're on call 24/7. They are the pipeline to the president. You don't get to see the president without the chief of staff saying so, unless it's some sort of emergency or something. They do have to know about everything, and they are the bottleneck of the information that gets to the president. Excuse me. They decide what information the president needs to have access to, so they can actually do something, because you can't do something about everything. And so it's the chief of staff that kind of helps that sort of thing. One of the last presidents not to have a chief of staff was Jimmy Carter, and that was a big mistake, because now he was running everything. He even kept track of who was playing on the tennis courts or using the swimming pool. I mean, really stupid stuff. And he tried to have his hand in everything. That's why I say never vote for an engineer. He had a real problem with delegating, and he was looking at individual trees in the forest when he should have been looking at the forest as a whole. That's what a chief of staff does. The chief of staff looks at trees and decides which ones the president should worry about to keep the forest as a whole good. So that's why you always got to have a chief of staff. I was real surprised George W. Bush had a chief of staff, Andrew Card, who was there for 6 years. 6. And that's just ridiculous. That guy must have had an iron, steel, titanium constitution. It was that good. For being chief of staff for 6 years, that's a long, long time for chief of staff. Like I said, they don't usually last long. So, Office of Management and Budget. Currently, that is Jeffrey Zients, Z-I-E-N-T-S, Zients. Then there's White House Press Secretary was Jay Carney to begin with. Now it's Josh Earnest, E-A-R-N-E-S-T, Josh Earnest. He's the guy that comes out and speaks and says what the president thinks about this, that, or the other. Excuse me. They have 2 press conferences every day, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. So if there's something important they want to say in the afternoon, there's just enough time to get it on the 5 o'clock or the 5:30 news, so they can do that. Excuse me. U.S. Trade Representative now is Michael Froman, F-R-O-M-A-N, Froman. It used to be Ron Kirk, the former mayor of Dallas. He was there for 4 years and then finally decided that he'd had enough. He's been in government enough and he wanted to go home and take just a nice lawyer job, probably end up being more of a lobbying job of some sort. Once you talk to the president, have the president's ear, people always want to be your friend so they can say, hey, the president might want to know about this. So, yeah, I'm sure he's got a good lobbying job. But Michael Froman is the current U.S. Trade Representative, which is real important for us as far as that goes. It's also the Executive Office of the President. 2,000 plus staff. They cost somewhere over $700 million to run. This is the Office of Management and Budget. Probably one of the funnest jobs around, the Council of Economic Advisors. These guys, their job is to study a country. They're assigned a country, and they are to know all the ins and outs of that country. So magazines, politics, newspapers are all sent to them, and they study up on it. So if something ever happens, the president calls you in. Okay, there was a coup. What happened, and which side do you think we should support? And all you got to do is know what started the coup, who's in charge, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'd love to be the economic advisor to Tahiti. I would make sure that Tahiti is tourism is their #1 import there. So I would go and sacrifice 9 months out of the year with my boots on the ground, making sure every one of those hotels is well done. Make sure I check out every beach and make sure all the beaches are clean and clear, and go to all the restaurants, make sure they aren't serving any bad food or anything like that. So I'd be #1 on the job. I'd come back when I had to make sure that get a good report. But spend most of my time in Tahiti. Make sure that we're doing a good job for them and they're doing a good job for us. Yeah, I love that. Anyway, there's also the NCS, National Security Council. Basically, they brief the president every morning and tell him what the problems are and stuff like that they might want to worry about. Office of Trade Representatives, and then their communication staff. Finally, the last resource the president has is the First Lady herself. First Lady has evolved. It started with her just being, the chief hostess, hostess with the mostess. And that was really seen by Dolly Madison, who really turned it into a very fashionable type of job for the First Lady. She was noted for having everybody come in feeling very comfortable coming to the White House. Of course, people don't stay in the White House as much as they used to before. When they used to have they still have all these bedrooms and stuff like that, but a lot of people would come and stay at the White House, and it was the First Lady's job to make sure that they got anything and everything that they needed to make them feel comfortable. And Dolly Madison was known for that one. So, of course, it slowly has evolved. And the main involver, one first lady who really changed it all was, yeah, you're right, Eleanor Roosevelt. Most people didn't know that FDR was paralyzed pretty much from the waist down because of polio. He could move his legs a little, but not very much. Kind of like the problem that Greg Abbott has, our governor. He can actually move his legs just a bit, but certainly not enough to stand or walk or anything like that. He might be able to stand if he did what FDR did, which was they had metal braces that sort of prop him in, stick him into, and then they lock them up and would sort of prop him up. It's kind of weird because they did whistle stop tours with a train, and they would put the braces on and prop him up against the railing on the back, and he'd hold on. They'd come into town, and there he was waving, and he'd give a speech, and then off they go, and he'd wave, and then they'd drag him inside, put him down, let him sit and rest until they came to the next town, and they'd prop him back up out there. And so nobody really knew that he couldn't walk. He would be on newsreels all the time, but you'd always see him sitting down. A lot of times he'd be in a chair with his legs crossed, looking like he was just, whatever. I remember one, though, he was sitting in a chair, and one of his nieces or nephews came up, and they came around the chair. I was thinking it was kind of weird that he, just sat there and he turned the wrong way first, and then he turned back around to the other way. Most adults probably would have got up to pick up the child because they were real little, but no, he just waited for him to come around, and then he picked him up and put him in her lap. So only towards the end of their presidency did some people finally get the idea that he was paraplegic. It was kind of weird. He's considered the second greatest president, and for the longest time, the only real memorial we had to him, besides being a face on the dime, was one little statue, which was him in a cape, and he was sitting in his wheelchair, but you couldn't really see the wheelchair because the cape was covering it all. But if you kind of looked under the cape, there it was, and it was kind of in a five-way intersection in Washington, D.C. Finally, somebody says, this just isn't right. And now they've done, next to the Jefferson Memorial, just down from there, is the FDR Memorial. It's really nice, especially if you like water and waterfalls. It's all, there's a lot of fountains and things like that, water all over the place. I went there. Oh man, on a sunny day, it was a sunny day. I just sat there, closed my eyes, leaned back, sat in the sun, listened to the water, and read all his quotes they had about some of his sayings. It's really awesome. If you ever get the chance to go to Washington, D.C., go. There's so much free stuff you can do. It's amazing. Anyway, so Eleanor Roosevelt, because he was paraplegic, sorry, I digressed, was able to do a lot of this stuff for him. She did a lot of the chief of state stuff, going around cutting ribbons, doing boats and war memorials and things like that. She also was chief diplomat quite a bit. She would go to foreign countries and represent the president of the United States and all that sort of good stuff. She also even did some of her own legislation, and she was very active in politics, so she became party leader at one point, telling the Democrats what to do, this, that, and the other, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's still what the First Lady will do today. A lot of legislation, a lot of chief of state stuff, a lot of chief diplomat stuff, and some party leader stuff. So one thing they'll never do is commander-in-chief. The military will never take orders from the First Lady. Secondly, they probably won't do too much in the way of administration. They can't do executive orders or tell the bureaucracy what to do, technically. So there you go. If the president can't tell them what to do, then they can just do whatever they want to do for the most part until the president says bye-bye. Always remember, if you ever have a presidential job, you are there at the pleasure of the president, meaning whenever the president wants to replace you, you are replaced. The fancy way of saying you're fired is, I'd like your letter of resignation on my desk this afternoon. Thank you. Bye-bye. So there you go. Presidential relationships. There are 3 relationships the president has to do or be good at, or they're never going to really get much done. First is the president, the public. They have to connect with the public. Some presidents were better at this than others. Reagan was a master at it. Because of his movie career, he was able to really connect with people. When he was on the TV, people felt like they were talking to him or to them individually, even though he was talking to millions and millions of people over the television. So he really knew how to connect. But public approval is very important. And without a high approval rating, Congress can ignore some of the things that you want to do, and that's the problem that Obama has had. He's been stuck in the mid to low 40s for most of his presidency as far as job approval ratings and or public approval ratings. That makes it hard for him to pass anything through Congress. Because then they just look at its approval and say, "Look, the American people don't want that. They don't approve of you, so we're not going to listen to you." So if you have high approval ratings, then you can see about getting stuff passed. Of course, it also helps for votes if you're looking for a second term. So there's that too. President and Congress, they have to find a way to get along with Congress, especially if it's a Congress of the opposite party. Once again, Bill Clinton was a real master of that and was able to still pass a lot of stuff, even though he had a Republican Congress for 6 years of his 8 years in Congress. So um, Obama should have studied a little bit more what President Clinton did. But anyway, then finally the president and the media. They need to make sure they're on good terms with the media so that they can get things done. Like I said, they have these twice a day media things where the press secretary talks to the media and they get things done and all this sort of back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Like I said, Reagan was had great relationships with everybody. That's why he was called the great communicator, because he really could communicate, especially when he had a script. He was one of the best with the script because of his movie training. Of course, just like everybody else, maybe you don't have a script, you would go off topic, and that's when you got into trouble quite often. So then, of course, Bush, he's got a lot of them. His most famous was when he was in Tennessee, and he was talking, and he got off script, just sort of an ad lib. He said, "I know you got that saying up here in Tennessee, I'm sure, because we got it down in Texas. It's fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on," and he totally forgot. I saw that live, and I was sitting at the television going, "Shame on me! Shame on me!" I couldn't believe I was yelling at my own television. It was so embarrassing. But finally he said, "Well, just don't fool me again." And that's one of his basic sort of gaffes. And then he looked down, went back onto his script, and kept going. So every president always does pretty good when they're on script. It's when they go off script or their teleprompter stops or whatever. And I know Sarah Palin made a big deal about Obama and teleprompters, but that's every president. Everybody uses teleprompters. There's nothing, he wasn't overusing them. Everybody uses them all the time. Well, that was interesting. They found out later that Sarah Palin, who criticized Obama for using teleprompters so much, did that quite often when she was governor. She would send email after email making sure that everybody tested the teleprompters and make sure those teleprompters were working right, because she didn't want them going out in the middle of her speech. Yeah. Anyway. What does it take to win the presidency? 270 electoral votes is what you need. That's the magic number. Basically 50% plus one. We have 535 senators and representatives. Each one of them is worth an electoral vote. We also have the three people, the two senators and the one representative for District of Columbia. They don't count during regular votes, but during an electoral process they do, so that adds 3 more to the count. So now we're at 538. Half of that is 269. So you need 1 more. For a simple majority, 270, and that's what you need to win. And so anytime you see on electoral night 270 or more, that's the winner. And you don't have to wait for any more counting, because they can count till doomsday, and they'll never have enough to overcome 270. So whoever gets 270 first wins. And that's how it goes. Every state has a minimum of 3 electoral votes. As every state is going to have 2 senators and 1 representative. And several states have that. Biggest state with 3 is Montana. A lot of those up in the northern central area, North and South Dakota, I think have 3. Montana has 3. I know Wyoming has 3. I think there's Vermont, I think, has 3 as well. And maybe Delaware. Don't quote me on Delaware, but I think Delaware. Rhode Island has 4. Alaska has 4. Hawaii has 4. because they have too many people, so they get one more because of all the people that they have there. So there you go. It helps when you win the popular vote. That's usually a good indication that you're going to win the electoral vote as well, but not always. There have been several times when presidents have won the popular vote but still lost the presidency. Look at Andrew Jackson in the 1828 election. And there was Rutherford B. Hayes in the 1872 election, I believe. There was another one in 1888. And then currently in 2000 with George W. Bush. Al Gore had 250,000 more votes than Bush did, but Gore still lost. So it helps to have the popular vote. You can a lot of presidents, all they need is they get a majority and they claim a mandate of the voters. Well, here's another screwing up of definitions. The true mandate of the voters means that that a supermajority of voters voted for you. What they're talking about here is a landslide victory. And to get a landslide victory, you have to beat your opponent by 5% or more. 5% is what you're looking for a landslide victory. That's hard to get in presidential politics. Usually it's very close with all those people voting. It's tough to get more than 5%. But Obama did it back in 2008. He got 7%. So he had a true mandate of the people. 4 years before that, when Bush had his second term and actually won with a popular vote and all that, he was claiming a mandate of the voters when it was a really close race between him and Kerry. He only won like 2%, so he wasn't a true mandate. Anyway, several of the perks of the presidency. The biggest one is the White House, 18.3 acres right there in the middle of Washington, D.C. All those bedrooms, all those rooms, everything that comes with it, the butlers, the maids, the secretaries, the tailors, chef, gardeners, etc., etc., etc. Bush was getting ready to privatize the entire White House staff, and of course the staff didn't really care for that because these were good federal jobs. But after 9/11, that plan went out the window because it'd be a nightmare to keep having people come and go, security, check them out, and all that every time. So only a few people do change from time to time. The most notable is usually the chef. Chefs come and go. Usually they'll stay for anywhere from 3 to 9 months to a year, and then they'll usually switch to somebody else because they just, it's a great honor to be the chef of the White House, and so they want to sort of spread it around. I think it was Jimmy Carter, made sure to let his wife do it, and she made sure to have a new chef every 6 months, and that's sort of been the norm ever since then. Reagan kept a few around for over a year, as did Bush, but the Obamas have been switching theirs up pretty often. So we'll see how that goes. There's a lot of stuff that goes on in the White House. They have a pool, of course. They have tennis courts. They've turned half of that into a basketball court with a hoop now for Obama to play basketball. The first Bush put in horseshoe pits. Downstairs there's a movie house with real movie seats, and they actually have their own popcorn maker and a soda fountain in the back. They get any current first-run movies 2 weeks in advance. So when the new Avengers is coming out May 1, middle of April, Obama can see that if he wants to. Just ask him. He shall receive. Darn it. Wish I could go see that early. But anyway. So 2 weeks ahead. They also have a bowling alley down there. I think it was LBJ who put that in. That would be kind of fun. But lots of different things you can do as far as that goes. Then, of course, they also have all those events, the lighting of the National Christmas tree, usually on the grounds. Easter egg hunt. Sometimes they do T-ball and stuff like that, stuff for the kids, and you never know. Transportation, big one is for the president, Air Force One. How many Air Force Ones are there? Well, technically there's only one. The only Air Force One is the one that the president is flying in at the time. But how many planes does the president have to use? 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 9, 12, 25. Actually, it's 4. 3 of them are the same. Basically, it's that 747, which they've updated, turned into a big communications thing. And anytime the president flies somewhere, he gets in the plane and he goes. But a second plane with a skeleton crew, exactly the same, takes off about 30 minutes later and follows the president. If there's ever any mechanical failure on that first plane, then they just switch to the second plane, come home, fix the first one, and it comes back. And then that plane with the mechanical failure goes into maintenance so they can check it. The third plane is in maintenance until it's needed. Usually there's a rotation, like every 4 months, one plane goes into maintenance, and while they use the other two, etc., etc., etc. And they check every bolt, every piece of metal, everything. They go over the entire plane. They almost take it apart and put it back together again to make sure everything's working perfectly. There was one time in Waco, President Bush was coming back from his ranch in Crawford, and one of the engines wouldn't start when they got on, so they just everybody got off, they pushed it aside, brought the other plane up, everybody got in, flew home, fixed the engine, it flew home, went into maintenance, the other one came out, and everything was cool. Most people don't know about the fourth plane, though. The fourth plane is considered what they call the nuclear option plane. This is for if there's ever a nuclear war. Whenever the president goes somewhere, the nuclear option plane follows. They stay in the sort of the general area where the president is, because they really don't expect a nuclear war these days, but it's still there just in case. Because if there is a nuclear war, when atomic bombs go off, they also create an electromagnetic pulse, which is going to fry electronic components, which is why if the president were in Air Force One, at the time a nuclear bomb went off, he'd be basically flying in a brick, because it's almost totally electronic, and all that would get fried, and down it would go for the most part. Although they've tried to, cover up most of it, protect it as well as they could, they don't know if that's actually going to happen. So, but this fourth plane, that would never happen because it is totally mechanical. It's sort of a Learjet type plane. It's pretty small. It only hold about 12 people total, plus the pilots. But there is nothing electronic on it whatsoever. It's all mechanical. It's almost like you got to wind it up to get it to start. But it will fly, and the idea is if there's a nuclear war or something, then they can fly that in and get the president out. When no other planes should be working, this one will, and they'll come and take them away. There are also the helicopters, a fleet of 25 helicopters. 5 or 6 of them are in Washington, D.C. The others are strategically placed around the United States and move about based on the president's schedule in case we may need them. Hope you can't hear that dog too well. Almost done, though. George W. Bush was looking to replace them, but a lot of people, because these are really old helicopters, the old Sea Kings from the 1960s, so they've been around a long time. And Bush wanted to replace them with new, updated Blackhawks. People looked at the price and said, oh, man, can we afford that? And so they decided not to. Obama came on. The first thing he said, oh, yeah, these Sea Kings are nice, da-da-da-da-da. But now I hear they're talking about replacing them again. So we'll see where that goes. And then, of course, there are the limos and the SUVs and all that. If you've ever seen the presidential limo, you might want to look that up online. Obama presidential limo, because a lot of people thought that it was kind of weird that the new presidential limo, a new model comes out, and it looks kind of like a pimped out ride. And so some people thought that was Obama, but it wasn't. It just so happened that new car design came out basically because of what was going on in Iraq and the war on terror and all that, and the IUDs. And basically they took everything they learned about IUDs and put it into a new presidential limo to make the president that much more safe. What's weird about the new limo is it sits a little higher. The wheels are a lot bigger, and since they're bigger wheels, they have these really sparkly hubcaps and all that sort of stuff. And it has a vague V shape down below to help push the blast off to the sides and all this sort of good stuff. But it basically came out with all the new, latest and greatest information they knew about helping IED blasts and keeping the president safe, but it just happened to look kind of like a pimp mobile. So if you ever get a chance, just Google that. It's kind of funny looking, but anyway. And then, of course, they get all free medical and dental at Bethesda Hospital. This is the Navy's premier. Bethesda, B-E-T-H-E-S-D-A, Bethesda. Bethesda. This is like Walter Reed for the Army. This is the Navy's top hospital. If you ever get assigned to Walter Reed or Bethesda, if that's on your resume, you can get almost any medical job you want throughout the United States because it's considered tops. Of course, they'll expect the top high quality out of you too. So, and then finally, constitutional amendments concerning the presidency. First one was the 12th. The original Constitution says the person who gets the most electoral votes becomes president. The person who gets the second highest number of electoral votes becomes vice president. What we ended up with the Madison, or with the Adams presidency, was James Madison of one party being president, and Thomas Jefferson of the other party being vice president. Not a real happy camping type situation there. Can you imagine if George W. Bush had to put up with Al Gore as his VP, or Obama with, well, I think McCain actually probably could have handled it. Could you imagine Obama with Romney? Those guys hated each other. They really didn't like each other at all. You could kind of tell they were forcing smiles whenever they met. No, that wouldn't work out too much. So that's was sort of the main reason to have the 12th Amendment, so that the president and the vice president would be of the same party. And what it did was it split the election, so you have somebody running just for vice president, somebody running just for president, and everybody got a vote in each election. So whoever voted for and became president, the same people usually vote for vice president. So it was a pretty sure deal at that point. 20th Amendment surprisingly changed inauguration date from March 20th to January 20th. This was done in 1933. It was they noticed because of the Great Depression was in full swing when they voted in FDR in November of 1932. Hoover was president, and well, he didn't do anything when he was voted out from November until March. Hoover didn't do a damn thing. He said, I'm not really president. People don't like what I'm doing, so I'm not going to do anything. I'll let FDR do it when he gets here. So America was kind of put on automatic pilot for 5 months, and with the Great Depression going on, things just got worse and worse and worse. So it was a real mess. So inauguration changed, basically moved it up from March to January. But I thought it was interesting. It's the 20th Amendment, which goes March 20th to January 20th, all on the 20th. Then finally, 22nd Amendment, which limits the presidents to 2 terms. Right, that's what I got on the president. That's all we were doing for this week. We'll see if I can come back next week. I'm still getting tired just walking around the house, but hopefully it will get better. If not, I'll put up an announcement and let you know on Friday. So over the weekend, you can either get prepared to come back to class, or I'll be getting put up Chapter 8 for the bureaucracy. All right. Well, don't worry about debates or participation. I'm just going to wait until I get back to worry about that. And I got to get on grading your papers here too. All right. Okay. See you later.